I'm gonna kick your ass first. And then yours.
What's up, Goth Gamer Nation and Goth Hunters? And welcome to Darkened Streams, wherein I review every one of the 327 episodes of Supernatural, or however many YouTube allows before shutting me down. What did we learn in the last episode? Just because you're hunters doesn't mean you have to disregard the trauma of supernatural victims. In cases like this, be more creative with how you deceive them. Play on their emotional vulnerability to get what you need out of them. Also, if your partner is exhibiting supernatural abilities, it's important to be supportive and be a pillar of strength for them, lest they think you've let your guard down for 1 fucking second. Season 1, episode 15, entitled The Benders, was written by returning champ and X-Files alum John Shiban. This is of course a great comfort to me. The presence of an ex-X-Files writer or director is like a dad in the bleachers that I can glance back to every now and then for reassurance before their ghostly image fades away and I wake to greet the world with the same void in my development, where I carry on like an overly complicated piece of IKEA furniture with tools missing from the box. Anyway, this episode was directed by Peter Ellis, who previously directed episode 5 this season, Bloody Mary. Unfortunately, this would be the last episode he would direct as he passed away a year later. I can only assume he was meant to return to directing in early season 2, because the second episode of that season, Everyone Loves a Clown, is dedicated to his memory. And it's a real shame because both The Benders and Bloody Mary have a very distinct visual style to them and some great atmosphere despite the spotty writing. He clearly knew how to elevate the material. Farewell, Peter. I hope you are granted more rest than many of the characters in Supernatural's later seasons. Breaking the established format, this episode opens with the title card and then goes into a heavily truncated cold open with the opening credits over it. It's confusing, man. Like, what the fuck's going on? This ain't what I'm used to and I'm scared. Oh, I'm supposed to be right. It's a spooky show. Well done. In this, we see a boy watching his father, Alvin Jenkins, get dragged under a car, and then it cuts to the boys already interviewing the family, disguised as state police. I guess they really wanted to dive right in and not waste a second getting into this one. Alvin's son explains that he heard what sounded like a monster making a whining growl outside, which his mother dismisses as he was watching a monster movie at the time. The boys have taken interest in the case mostly because of some scouting their father had outlined in his journal, and the absurd amount of missing persons cases in the county. This scene at the bar is another in a series of scenes where they throw out seemingly random guesses as to what they might be hunting, which this time includes 2 deep-cut vintage urban legends bringing up phantom gassers, a 1940s era myth about a tall home invader that gasses people with a flit gun, and even Spring Heel Jack, a sort of European boogeyman. Sadly, neither of these concepts actually appear in this series outside these passing references. I swear, they always bring up something cool, like, oh, maybe it's a fire goblin. And I'm just like, one of these days, please let it be a fire goblin. That'd be so fucking sick, dude. Knowing them, it would just be a regular fucking guy with green eyes or something. In essence, the vague realm of the supernatural they are assuming is something that seeks to silently abduct others, which even they admit is pretty flimsy. The boys have a brief spat with each other.
We should get an early start.
Man, you really know how to have fun, don't you, Grandma?
It's not important to the plot, really, but it's just good character continuity, which, having last watched the later half of the series, I am a bit starved of. Sam waits for Dean out by the Impala, but when Dean returns, there is no sign of him.
Did my brother turn into a cat?
Seeing a traffic camera outside the bar, Dean heads to the sheriff's station in Hibbing, still posing as state police, to ask for access to the footage in hopes of finding his missing cousin. He meets a deputy named Kathleen, who refuses to allow him to break protocol and essentially open an investigation off the books, but he manages to puppy dog eyes his way into getting her help. I do like the continued continuity that when he has her look up Sam in the police records, she remarks that his brother is dead and was wanted for murder, which for a long-form TV series shouldn't be that amazing an accomplishment, but you gotta celebrate the little things. At almost the exact time Sam went missing, the camera picked up a rusty truck driving off that had suspiciously clean plates on it, and the two agree that they are likely stolen. At that moment, a van drives by, similarly eaten by rust, and makes a whining growl. Sam wakes up in a steel cage and struggles in vain to break out of it, waking up another person in a cage next to him, Alvin Jenkins, who, I think everyone would be upset if I didn't mention, was in an episode of X-Files called Excelsis Day. And I know the premise of these videos is so we can all gather and express our shared appreciation for X-Files, but that's an episode I would confidently say you can skip. I don't think that show has many missteps, but that's a big old misstep and fall down the stairs and piss yourself. It's an episode that has no idea where it's going, leading to a conclusion that doesn't seem to resolve anything, and is immediately hamstrung by the fact that it opens with a woman being raped by a ghost, which is already distasteful, but the rest of the episode then plays out with nobody, Mulder included, believing a word the victim says.
So you think that Michelle Charters was raped by a 74-year-old schizophrenic?
It's possible.
An invisible 74-year-old schizophrenic.
And operates as though anything about this story is, like, cute.
And it don't work much better either.
Thank you for sharing.
Funny stuff. It's odd in that it's almost prescient in a way, touching on many shithead talking points that would become relevant later.
Ever since this sex harassment fad, men can't say what's on their minds.
But it's also oblivious to this, and not saying anything with it, and writes Mulder spooky. The guy who's willing to jump to aliens or astral projection or Mothman in response to any case as unwilling to just believe a rape victim.
I think that Michelle Charters concocted this story to get out of a job she hates.
I didn't think I'd ever say this, but bad ep. Fucking anyways, Sam is surprised to learn that his captors appear to be just a couple of dudes.
They're just people. Yeah. What'd you expect?
While they're out looking for him, Kathleen finds out that Dean's badge number is from a stolen badge.
I lost some weight.
But he's once again able to appeal to her emotions and get her to continue the search. She glances at a photo of someone on her visor and appears to empathize with him. See, she had a brother who went missing under identical circumstances, so she has her own reason to want this case closed. Back at the cages, the electronic lock on Alvin's cage mysteriously opens, and despite Sam expressing his bad vibes about that, Alvin takes off. It soon becomes clear why he was let loose. He's being hunted, run down by a bunch of murderous hillbilly types with spears and booby traps. Already compromising enough not arresting him immediately, Kathleen cuffs Dean to her car and investigates the Bender family, who owns the truck, alone, where she is knocked out and thrown in a cage next to Sam. Dean hears the familiar growl of the truck and manages to pick the lock on his cuffs before the Benders can spot him. The locks on the cages require a key, so Dean heads into the house to try and find it. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this episode's similarity to a good episode of X-Files. Well, that's debatable. It's probably the most fucked up episode, that's for sure. I'm talking, of course, about Season 4, Episode 2, entitled Home, where the premise similarly concerns a violent redneck family in the place of any kind of supernatural entity. The difference being that Home was such an unpleasant episode that it required a viewer discretion warning before its airing, and to this day, it's bizarre how they were able to depict things like a baby being buried alive on basic cable. The Benders makes a valiant effort to, I wouldn't say match that, but to attempt to be gruesome in their own way within the claustrophobic boundaries of what is allowed on CW. And you gotta consider that when this episode aired, you know, what other shows did the network have that were all that dark? Buffy had already moved networks, and Angel was finished, so the closest thing was maybe Charmed, I guess? But the rest of their programming before the WB to CW merger was just flailing to find anything that stuck. So you had a bunch of shows that lasted one season, if they even made it that far, like Jack and Bobby, The Mountain, Just Legal, which really should have died when somebody suggested that as the title. Suffice to say, the fact that this episode is as grim and nihilistic as it is noteworthy at least. This episode and Skin, I think, were noble efforts to replicate the magic of X-Files on a network that would never in a million years allow that. So it's no home, but it does have fun shots like this one that allow you to put together that something gruesome is happening. It also has some glorious lines of dialogue that wouldn't be caught dead in later seasons.
When you're done with a boy, shoot the bitch too.
The last 10 minutes or so of the episode is pretty much Dean in stealth mode walking around this fucked up nightmare house, which is not bad set design. Someone on this production cared to make this place look creepy. Also, I miss when someone was choreographing fights. Look at this shit. They're beating the heck out of each other. Dean is captured and tortured by the Benders and told to choose either Sam or Kathleen to be killed. He says Sam, assuming they would hunt him, giving him a chance to win, but they really just plan to shoot him in the cage. I gotta say, I like this episode, and pretty much my only real issue with it is the editing around Sam's escape. Earlier, when Sam first tried to escape, he tore a piece of wiring off the wall that released a bracket. An emphasis is put on this happening.
It's a bracket.
Oh, thank God, a bracket. Now we got him, huh?
So when one of the Benders shows up to shoot Sam, we get a shot of the bracket on the floor, which he throws at the guy, and then there's a gunshot and we cut away, back to Dean yelling at the rest of the family about killing his brother. Then they cut back, and Sam is just on top of this guy. It just seems like a lot of work done to establish that Sam has an object to throw at someone. And then in the edit, we don't really see it happen. He just says, "Hyah," and then he's on top of him. So he overpowers him and takes his gun, which he actually breaks by hitting him with, which I suppose is an interesting subversion, but it comes on top of this weirdly edited sequence. In any case, they get the upper hand on two of them, and Sam leaves Kathleen with a gun on the father. I do like how, before he leaves, Sam understands what's about to happen, but it's just like, yeah, fuck him. Kathleen asks him why they killed her brother.
'Cause it's fun.
He's pretty fucked up. It's not bad. Not bad. As a thanks for the closure on her brother's disappearance, she allows them to take off before the police and FBI show up. I think it's a strong ending as well. Kathleen's final scene where she expresses the sort of emptiness that came with learning the truth and exacting revenge is well performed and a real bummer to go out on, which is probably why they have the boys taking silly swipes at each other shortly before the credits. I like this one. It's not perfect, and it is derivative of a particular episode of a show that people in this show were directly involved with. But it's well filmed, it's well acted, it has this tone that's, for lack of a better term, fun creepy in a trashy 80s movie sense. All the villains are these over-the-top caricatures. The little girl especially, there's something amusingly overly creepy about her that only fits within this episode. At several points in this series, they try to do the thing with the creepy little girl trope, and it never works. But here it does, because it's both the performance and because it's conceptually fucked up that a child would be raised in this Texas Chainsaw meets True Detective Season 1 environment. And it's one of those stories that they had to depict eventually. Those two can't just stumble into some supernatural nightmare every week. Some of them have got to be just murderers, right? You'd think they'd be constantly thinking they're on the trail of a werewolf or something, only to be disappointed when they uncover a serial killer, and are just like, fuck it, let's move on to the next town, I guess.
Yeah, Dean. Kind of the black sheep of the family. Handsome, though. I pretty much pulled him from a fire. And ever since then, I felt responsible for him. You know, like it's my job to keep him safe.
You were worried about me. All I'm saying is you vanish like that again, I'm not looking for you.
Godzilla vs. Mothra.
That's my favorite Godzilla movie.